So this one's called Batman Ego, and it's written and drawn by Darwyn Cooke.
You were like, Maggie, you will really like this. And you didn't tell me much about it. And this was so interesting. I really, really liked it. And I also liked that it's a one-shot, because the problem I have with a lot of comics, especially superhero comics, is they're all relying on all kinds of past knowledge and you don't know where you're supposed to start. But this is just isolated and you don't have to know much. And so I liked the accessibility element of this too. That was really great for me.
I think you touched on something really important there. This story feels eternal.
Yeah.
I think it fits anywhere in your literacy with the character.
Yeah, and I feel like it could fit anywhere within any plot of Batman, because it's just exploring this one idea about Batman. It's not so much about a certain plot or a certain villain.
It felt very theatrical. It felt like an interlude or an aside.
Yeah, because it was so much, it's a character study. It's a psychological study of this one character. So it's just like him having a monologue with himself. You totally see that in a play.
And it really feels like it's playing with the idea of the character. It's kind of like stretching it and seeing how far you can go before it breaks. The character is very fallible. Yeah. It reminded me of Batman Year One a bit, in that he's wounded and bleeding and stumbling around a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You're confronting the premise of like, how would this work? And would it work? The idea of this character.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to say right now, I liked this better than Batman Year One. And I really liked sense. Batman Year One, but this was very much for me. I really liked this.
And I mean, if this is from the 90s, Batman is only more well-known now, especially after the Christopher Nolan movies.
Yeah, that was, I think, a big deal for Batman and knowledge.
Everyone, I mean, since the 30s, they know the basic premise of this character.
Yeah.
And I feel like this story engages with the mythology at that level, where they treat him as a known cultural myth. In the same way, we all have a basic understanding of A Christmas Carol. And that is a major influence, I think, on this work.
There's so much Christmas Carol in this, and I really liked that. I thought that was such an interesting, unexpected element to bring into it.
And you're keeping it simple. Like you said, it's more of a singular character study. But even though there are nods to some of the famous villains, like Year One, the villain is an idea, or possibly Batman, depending on how far you are into the story.
Sure.
Or here, it's Batman's fear, which makes it even more inward and insular and, like you said, accessible.
And just more relatable, versus some random dude named the Joker trying to kill people. Like, that's not the point. This is more... that's something else I struggle with superheroes, is that I don't connect with it at all. I'm like, how on earth am I supposed to relate to this person who has all these superpowers and like it's all these like big scale things? Like, it's not, I don't connect with it at all. This I really connected with.
And I think that's part of the reason I've always liked this character more than the more supernatural ones, because he's just a guy and he doesn't have powers. He has tools and his brain, which, especially when he's in a room with someone like Superman, I think makes him a lot more relatable. And I understand Superman, that kind of character, can be aspirational. But I prefer the kind of scrappiness of Batman.
Exactly.
So let's do a little recap here. Okay. This is not Maggie level, but you knew that already. So we begin with this little framing device.
I had to do it to you once.
We begin with it. It doesn't feel good.
No, it doesn't.
We begin with the framing device.
Sorry, is it okay if I keep interrupting you while you're trying to do this carefully crafted recap?
That's fine. I think you're accenting it. Aww. You're seasoning the recap with color and,
Salt Bay.
So...
just to give you a visual, you look so mad. The guy with the salt.
I know.
You like that.
It's like a 10-year-old reference. That was a meme before memes,
but you
Maggie.
Do that all the time. You're always walking around with your little hand up.
I don't mean it to be that.
Well,
That's just what I'm feeling in the moment.
That's just who you are.
So we start with this little framing device, which, like all good framing devices, becomes a mirror and a callback at a crucial moment in the story. And
you're not supposed to interpret in the recap, Cam. You're supposed to be objective.
You want to do it?
No, absolutely not.
So it's Batman chasing after this guy and interrogating him and almost killing him. And it's a guy who is a henchman for the Joker. He worked for the Joker and tried to quit, basically. And the argument he gives Batman for why he betrayed the Joker and is just running away is that it doesn't matter that the Joker was caught. It doesn't matter that he's in prison because none of that ever lasts.
Yes, because he always escapes and kills more people.
Even when he's arrested, even when he's thrown in Arkham, none of it ever works. So the guy is saying, when he finds out that I quit or ratted on him, he's going to kill me, he's going to kill my family. And you kind of, like, I thought this story was going to become one of those larger critiques about Gotham and the power centers of a society.
Yeah. You have no idea.
Institutions.
You have no idea where this is going to go. Yeah.
And then the guy says, "So I did it for him and killed my wife and kid."
Yeah.
So he couldn't.
Yes.
And then you realize, oh, this is one of those kind of stories.
Yes.
So then the guy kills himself.
Yes, he jumps off a bridge.
Yeah.
Well, he tries to.
And Batman is trying to save him. He goes from being terrified of this guy to having this like horror and pity for him. And this basically causes Bruce Wayne to quit being Batman. He's pretty lost. He returns to the Batcave with some head trauma from whatever this recent escapade was with the Joker.
Yeah, because there's a whole thing also with like him trying to grab the guy as he falls, and he hits against this concrete wall, and
it's messy and
Batman
real.
is beat up, and yeah.
It's not perfectly choreographed.
No, it's not cool at all. It's pretty awful.
It's a very grounded vision of the character. And he's sitting in the chair at the Batcave, and he's not cool and brooding. He's exhausted, and he basically, in his head, and we're seeing a lot of the internal dialogue written out on the page, he decides to retire. And it lasts all of 20 seconds, and then we get our big Christmas Carol moment where the Batman side of him explodes out of him, and we have this fever dream that takes up the rest of the story. It's a discussion, or a debate, I guess, between Bruce Wayne and Batman. And they're interrogating, like we said before, the premise of the character. They talk about his no-kill policy. The Batman side says, hey, maybe we should just kill the Joker.
Yeah.
Since none of this stuff
Because
works.
he keeps getting caught. He keeps killing all these people. So every time you don't kill the Joker, you're kind of causing the death of all these people.
What are we doing with stopping crime if it's not working? Can we ever succeed in this mission?
Yeah.
Why did we start being Batman? All of these questions are explored through this like really brutal conversation between these two guys. And along the way, we get to see the origins of Bruce Wayne, Batman, Joker, through these Christmas Carol-esque sort of guided flashbacks.
Yes.
With just the Batman. I guess he's the kind of ghost of everything.
Yes.
And we build to this moment where we're recreating the framing device, and Batman hands Bruce Wayne a gun and tells him, like, if you're so sick of me being in your head, why don't you just kill yourself?
Yeah.
Like the guy at the beginning.
Yes.
And that's pulling together the whole mythos, because you have guns. Batman famously never uses guns. His parents were killed by a gun. You've got the suicide thing from the beginning, and the guy killing his wife and son is like an interesting kind of prism shift of how Batman's parents were killed. And Bruce decides not to kill himself and to basically shift his mission from revenge on crime to becoming a symbol of hope. And that's the end, is him kind of answering whatever the next crime and call is, and shooting out of the Batcave and meeting Commissioner Gordon and helping with the next emergency.
Right. And like he and Batman sort of come to this agreement that like it's just going to be a balancing act. Like the Batman side of him that wants to kill the Joker and, but still like, stop crime has to balance with the Bruce Wayne part of him that doesn't want to kill anybody and that wants to be hopeful. And so it's like, he's like, you can't get rid of one side. They both have to constantly be battling and balancing each other.
And you only get the title page part of this story when the Batman shoots out of him and appears.
Yeah, it's like a third of the way into the story.
Which I love.
I didn't realize that we hadn't hit the title page yet.
Right.
I was like, oh, cool. It's like when you watch a movie and the title card doesn't come up till 20 minutes in. You're like, oh,
and it's always
cool.
a good gut punch moment.
Yeah. And you're like, shit, that's
like
the intro,
Right. Like a cold open on a show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And when we do get the title card of Batman in small letters and Ego in huge letters, you also get a subtitle, which wasn't, it's not on most of the marketing or the outside of the cover of the story. You get the subtitle in context after you've understood the premise and the interpretation of the characters here. And the subtitle is A Psychotic Slide into the Heart of Darkness. I love the book Heart of Darkness, the Joseph Conrad book, which was then kind of thrown through the Dark Side of the Moon prism to become Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
But it's very much an interrogation of the other. It's playing with that. All the fun I mean, we spent a year and a half talking about Lord of the Rings, and everyone in there is a stern isolationist.
Yes, it's all about the other and the fear of the other, and the mistrust of the other.
It's fear of the unknown, the status quo being threatened, all of these incredibly human impulses.
Yeah.
They're messy and usually not for the best, but they're also eternal.
Yeah, and they can lead to harm, but they are natural. Yeah.
And it leads to these really nasty things where you're suspicious of outsiders. You have that whole exoticizing of the other.
Yeah,
But
and that's just a biological, like, there's a reason everybody is naturally like that. I mean, it causes problems in a society, but like as animals, it makes sense.
And the more we evolve and progress, we break those down.
Yes.
And we become, ideally, more trustful and kind and welcoming to each other.
And not fearful of people who aren't like you. Yeah.
And that is the long arc of civilization.
Yeah.
Heart of Darkness is very much confronting the ugliest parts of the fear of the other. And when I read it in grad school, when we went in to discuss it, a lot of the other people hated the book and thought it was awful and racist and all these other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
the point. It's exposing
about
that.
those things.
Yeah.
And I loved kind of the call out, the subtle call out of Heart of Darkness in this buried subtitle of this story.
Yeah. Read the subtitle again to me. Sorry.
A psychotic slide into the heart of darkness.
Cool.
Because you're taking that literally. Dark Knight, Heart of Darkness.
Yeah.
Two halves of his personality. And it really makes this even more of an overt character portrait and navigation of this folktale. I mean, at this point, Batman's an American folktale. Well, comics are an American medium, and he's probably the most famous character there. It's such a fun hook for the story. It's absolute catnip to someone like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's segue from that into something we talked about just before the recap when I was talking about the cultural myth element.
Okay.
By splitting these characters and having them discuss their differences, their values, their hatred of each other, and resentment in some form, it becomes a fractional character study because the character is defined by his contradiction.
Yeah.
And in that, when I finished reading this, because I read it twice just to make sure I got everything out of it. It's a one-shot, it's a complete story. I love that you can hold the whole thing in your hand. It's one vision, one artist doing all the work involved.
Yes, you love that.
I do. I absolutely love it because it's the purest artistic vision
Yeah.
I think you can get in art.
Yeah.
This story, by being so much a commentary as much as it is an original story, it blurs the line between creating art and reflecting or commenting on art.
Totally.
We've talked about this in the past few weeks.
Well, and that is something that's unique to something like the superhero genre is that you get to, in making your own story, you are also either intentionally or not commenting on everyone else's interpretation of the same character.
And it's an extremely dangerous thing to do. And it often goes horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Because it becomes a research paper or a thesis that is just strapped onto this lifeless plot.
Yes, and so it's not a story, it's just a
podcast.
Yeah, a lecture. Yeah.
And it's weird for me sometimes when I'm creating a story and writing something or drawing something, and we're doing this twice a week. Sometimes it's hard. And in the past, it's been hard to not cross over into just doing the other thing. Because you get too objective.
You mean when you're writing your own stuff? Yeah.
Because you get too objective and reflective and you're not doing the thing.
Yes.
I've described it before, kind of in just notes to myself, as the difference between telling a story and describing a story.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of modern storytelling that is people who want to talk about stories.
Yeah,
not
right.
who want to tell stories.
Because there's so much temptation now and encouragement of commenting on and, deconstructing things and commenting on it.
Deconstruction is such it's like a water cooler phrase now, but it is an incredible trend in fiction in the last 40 years, probably.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that or dislike that as a concept, but it can be overdone or just it no longer becomes a story.
Story's not the priority.
It's trying to hide behind the story but the story is not strong enough to carry it.
And the reason I'm coming at this from someone who was trained in philosophy, who's now an artist. So I have both of these parts running in my head all the time.
Right.
And the reason I love something like Heart of Darkness is that it is a very short book about extremely huge ideas. So it reads like a thought experiment.
Yeah.
It invites the philosophy, but all it does is pose the questions and tell a story inside that experiment. And then it ends quickly, and you can talk about it forever.
Yeah.
In the same way, all the classics we read in school were 150 pages.
Yeah.
They weren't 600 pages of world building
Yeah.
and playing out these different kind of what ifs. It was
Sure.
It's shortened to the point. So I think this does work as a one shot.
Sorry,
But
a ghost just knocked a pen down. It freaked me out. Okay,
blurring the line between creating art and reflecting or commenting on it. I mean, if you look at the story, it falls into all of that dangerous territory I talked about.
Yeah.
On paper, nothing happens. Bruce Wayne,
Yeah.
Bruce Wayne considers quitting and doesn't. And
Yeah.
he sits in the Batcave and monologues to himself.
Just reflects on his past. Yeah.
And reading it the second time, I was trying to be more objective and see the structure of this piece more. Most of this story is one speech
Yeah.
from Batman to Bruce Wayne. Like, this does feel like a stage play.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't like stage plays.
Sure.
Because they think nothing happens and it's too slow.
Yes.
Same reason people don't like period pieces and The Witch and all the shit we like.
Yeah. People like plot.
But there's so much meat on the bones.
Yeah.
It's so surreal. It is this psychological journey. So much happens that can't be described. And that's the beauty of having
Yes.
someone who's so gifted as a writer and as an artist. There's this one page that it's these juxtaposed panels where you have you have one panel that is half of Bruce Wayne's face, and right next to it you have half of Batman's. And then
I
you
like
have the
that
half of Joker and Batman.
Yes.
You have half of young Bruce Wayne. And it's the
like that one.
commentary is buried in the
Yes.
presentation of the
Yes,
story.
right. And even the moment when Batman hands Bruce the gun at the end, and you see a panel of Bruce holding the gun, it's like a close-up of his head, and then right next to it is an image of the guy at the beginning with the gun to his head. And so without writing anything down, without any words on the page, you know that he's thinking about that, and that's why he like changes his mind.
There's something tremendously liberating about comics when you come from a world of Netflix shows with really tight budgets, right? There's a moment here that I wrote down where Batman says, "I will show you madness." And because it's drawn by such an expressive and, I mean, just incredibly talented artist, his jaw shatters and his whole body erupts into fire.
Yeah.
And it swallows Bruce Wayne. And then 2 panels later, it melts away like it never happened. And it's back to that really terse, tense conversation.
Yeah, which tells you how like psychological and imagined all of this is. It's all in Bruce's head.
But also that sequence would be $1 million in a movie.
Yes.
So
it
if
would.
you have the advantage that comics gives you, where you can literally do anything.
Yeah.
Like I remember George R. R. Martin described writing, he was so frustrated with the process of adaptation. He'd worked in writing television, and he started writing Game of Thrones as, I'm going to do whatever I want in this story,
Yes.
with the idea going in that this is unfilmable.
Oh,
I'll go
yeah.
as big as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And you look at how much money HBO had to throw at it to make it
Yes.
even close to his vision.
Especially when you watch like season 1 compared to, you know, season 7. Like the budget is really different and it shows.
This story feels like a masterclass in the opportunities of this medium. It would be I would love to give this to someone as a first comic, because it really blows open that whole medium. Like, oh, this isn't just a cartoon flip book.
Yeah,
like
I
this
think-
isn't an animated movie that I have to read one panel at a time.
And it's not. Yeah, I think this would be a really great first comic because like even like Batman Year One, there's a lot going on. There are like 2 different narrators. There's 2 different like storylines happening, and it's kind of long. And it might be, and it's really dense. Like there's a lot of panels and a lot going on in each image. In that, whereas this, it's much simpler and in terms of style, and also in terms of like how much is on each page. I mean, it's still rich and wonderful, but it's not. It's certainly more accessible. This would be a great first comic.
And I've struggled with this because, I mean, I've sort of alluded to this in the last couple of months. I've been making comics for, I don't know, 6 months now.
Yeah, wow. I think
And
longer than that.
The first issue I did was very visual, very efficient, of like a plot beat happening in every frame. And I had this difficulty by the 3rd issue, which was getting more character heavy. Obviously, you've established things. You're really, you're set up in the world. And I realized I was drawing more like talking heads, where it was basically just the characters talking. And I had lost a bit of that directorial sense of the scene.
You were leaning into your like dialogue
It
writer.
was more written. It
Yeah,
wasn't like, where can I put the camera? How, because that's sort of the angle you're drawing from.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
you're framing each shot, basically. There's a wonderful visual element, which I think, when done well by someone who's better and more experienced than I am, can capture something that no other medium can. And to take a break from that, the project that I'm working on right now is much more visual.
Yes.
Where every page is one panel. Because I wanted to make something much more visual that really had to tell a story and direct every moment. So when I go back to that larger story that I'm already 3 issues into, it would have more of that cinematic flair. This creator, Darwyn Cooke, he's done a ton of work. I think he's dead now, but he did a ton of work while he was alive. And even this story is sold in a trade paperback with a bunch of his other Batman-related work.
Yeah.
And I was noticing just how talented he was by observing the words in the art and how complementary they were. They really exist independently on the page. For example, the narration in the tiny little text box is describing a killing spree the Joker went on. That's sort of the thing that happens off screen to initiate this story. And the image in that panel is showing ambulances being loaded and overloaded and overrun. That the complementary, the density of that storytelling is something that I'm not there, certainly.
Yeah.
But it really works.
Yeah.
And it reminds you of voiceover in a show or a movie.
Yeah.
But it has that like thought outness. It has a completeness to it that's really satisfying.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like, I think the best comics are the ones who, I mean, among other things, but they have this quality of making the media, they're justifying the use of the medium. Like, this would not work anywhere else. Like, Watchmen is famous for doing that. I haven't read Watchmen, but I've heard that people love it for that reason. And just some of the ones that I really like, I feel like they wouldn't work in any other medium.
It should feel essential.
It shouldn't. It's not just like, oh, well, this is a good story with some pretty pictures, or oh, well, this would actually be better as a movie because you need like the movement and you need the But when it's perfect for the medium, that's when it's the best. Like anything else,
right?
Like any book or any movie.
None of it feels backburner or uninspired. Like I said, it doesn't have the redundancy of the talking heads on every page.
Yeah.
When he shows a character's face, it's from a pointed, interesting angle. Batman being terrified that the guy killed his family is shot from below. And you see how wide his eyes are and how fearful he looks, even in the full, cool costume. He looks terrified. And it's not like he's offended.
Yeah.
It's pure fear.
Yeah.
And the rest of the story is about his fear, like we said before. But when you see the characters' faces, it's mostly reaction shots to something that's happening. And there's always something happening in this story.
Yes. Well, I was going to say earlier, like, that's why, like, even though not much happens in this story, like, plot-wise, all the flashbacks are very plot-heavy and action-driven. Yes. So that keeps you interested. Sorry.
So when you see the reactions to these brutal memories, your image of the character that is the totality of the images you see of them. In the same way you learn a character on screen by seeing the face and the reaction and studying the lines in Bryan Cranston's face. They do more acting for Breaking Bad than his voice could. Yeah. Like, it's just, I mean, if you look at the time you spend engaging with that element of the performance, it's mostly that. So you get this incredibly expressive portrait of each character, such that the character voices, I really felt like the second time I read it, definitely, I wasn't just hearing my own voice.
Oh, yeah. I
reading
like,
lines in my head.
Especially Batman. I felt like I could hear Batman's voice. It was like low and growly and scary.
Because it has such style and attitude. The character models are hyper fluid here.
Yeah.
And it really reminded me, I said this to you when I was trying to sell you on this thing to get you to read it, that it reminded me of the unbelievable, boundless personality you get in Disney or Pixar movies. And the example I used to you was Hades.
Yes.
Because I think he's the most expressive character in all of animation.
Well, and I think the animation style in Hercules is one of the best that I've ever seen. It's so expressive, and because it's all of these like supernatural characters, all these gods, you get things like Hades' face smushing in on itself when he gets punched by Hercules, and him flowing around and swooshing with his fire, and like it's such an expressive animation style,
which is what you want.
And all the curling, but which contrasts with like the pointiness of Hades with his fingers and stuff. It's really, I love that animation style. I think it's such a beautiful movie.
His hair is made out of fire, and it gets really, it's like a big inferno sometimes when he's upset, and it turns red, and then it'll go back to being, he'll like wipe it down, and it'll go back to being blue.
But it's still like floating around, flipping around.
And the second Batman jumps out of Bruce Wayne, it's Hades level like animation.
Yeah.
Because, and I wrote down, I was trying to find examples. The mouth, the teeth, they all change. They go from being these kind of clunky, offset, like tombstone teeth to being very harsh and exact and pointy.
Yeah, and pointy and scary.
And the size of his mouth changes. When he enters, he's all huge and hunched like one of the ghosts in Christmas Carol.
Yes.
And they play with scale so much, where he can be this huge, imposing presence, or he can be this vulnerable avatar of fear.
Yeah.
That he embodies for this character.
Yeah.
It's hyper fluid, expressive character models.
Yeah. The style also reminded me a lot, like in the character models and just in the color palette and the how graphic and stylized it is. It also really reminded me of The Me You Love in the Dark by Scotty Young, which is something I've talked about before. It's a really good, I think it's just 6.
It's a miniseries.
Yeah, 5 or 6 issues about this artist who ends up, I think, buying or renting this like old gothic abandoned house so she can just like be there by herself and paint. And then there's like this creepy ghost thing that shows up. Yeah. And the ghost thing, the character model for that is a lot like this Batman. I mean, that one's much more like supernatural and gets more weird than this does, but it reminded me a lot of that.
We're going to talk about that one soon.
Yeah.
So you mentioned color work. There's a constant shift in the color work here, in that you get some panels in a grayscale. You get some that are shades of pastel blue. Yeah. The flashbacks are all, or the origin stories, the different cutaway scenes you get are all rendered differently.
Yeah, like the ones, like the flashbacks of like his parents' death, that's like more all these like sepia tones almost, versus like remembering some other things, it's more like reds and oranges.
And the red is the big thing. The first time you see Batman, he pops up on this computer screen that's basically the whole wall of the Batcave that Bruce Wayne is like slumped over in front of.
Yeah.
And it's just a pure block of red behind Batman on that screen. And red is then used pretty sparingly throughout the rest of the comic, but it always has that violence and fear to it.
Yes.
Red is used for the muzzle flash. In this kind of collage shot where you see the gun, you see scared young Bruce Wayne, you see the muzzle flash, the silhouette of his parents, but all of that is concentrated into this one very creative image. It's not the obligatory couple panels. It's one that feels like an independent work of art.
Yeah.
And there's such an, I mean, it sounds stupid, but there's such an artistic flair to how this story is rendered. Green was the other color.
Lots
that stuck
of green.
out to me.
The like lime green.
Yes, and that's what I used for the cover image for this episode, is one of the panels, one of the introductory hunched Batman panels, which has this green smoke that's used for, I mean, it's basically a signpost that it appears at the entry and exit points of these memories and cutaways. It's a good visual cue to keep the audience centered.
You know what's funny is that, oddly enough, I'm just realizing with that green and like the model of Batman, it reminds me a lot of the Kim Possible animation of like Shigo and like all her black and green. And again, it's that like stylized, really graphic, like simple but bold style of animation and drawing. Like, that's kind of a silly comparison, but that's kind of what I'm thinking of now.
They're of the same era.
I really enjoyed the Kim Possible animation, honestly. Like, the way they styled the characters, I think, is really cool.
But the problem is that Americans scoff and are embarrassed by animation.
Especially when it's for children, which is most of the time it is.
But does that make it less valid as art?
Absolutely not.
Right.
Kim Possible is the best, I'm just saying.
So
anyway, continue.
This green
She's
color...
also a superhero. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, yeah,
with
sure.
supervillains. Shigo and Dr. What's-His-Name are supervillains, so...
Okay. The green is echoed through a lot of these cutaway memory scenes. There are flashes of it in Robin's costume when you see a panel of him, and Bruce says, I'm not going to talk about that, which sort of alludes to, yes, it's bad that you have a child soldier working for you, but also, depending on where you are in your literacy with the character, maybe you've seen one of the Robins killed
Yeah.
So you can read that as he doesn't want to talk about it because he's dead.
Right.
It works both ways.
Yeah, it doesn't get too into it.
The story is incredibly dynamic for the reader. You also get the Joker origin, where he falls into the vat of green chemicals, and that's how he has the white face and all the freaky hair, which is also green. You get a bit of that green shading and kind of light leak in the Two-Face shot too. It's more pastel, but it's still there.
Yes.
And then you get a shot of young Bruce Wayne with his parents in a happier time, and it's on Christmas.
Yeah.
And the entire page is dominated by this huge, again mirroring the scale you play with Batman because he's so fluid.
Yeah.
You get a Christmas tree that dominates almost the entire page.
Because it's a giant Christmas tree, because obviously the Waynes are very wealthy.
Right.
So, yeah.
And you connect that back with the green. And the other thing about color that I want to talk about for this book, because it's part of the reason I love it so much, is that it's almost entirely flat colors.
Yes.
The thing you said you won't read a comic if it doesn't have an art style you're attracted to.
Yeah.
I cannot stand modern coloring in comics that is airbrushing.
Yeah.
The reason I was trying to put together why I liked going back and reading the early 60s comics.
Yeah.
Like I've been reading the original run of Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. And there's such a charm to that.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the 60s Batman.
Yeah, because it's so cheesy and over the top and fun.
And incredibly charming.
It's not really for me, but I get why you like it.
It's charming and warm and light, and it just makes me happy. It couldn't be easier and lighter to read. But it has those blocks of color and those very unique shades of color. I mean, it's basically, I don't know, 6 or 8 colors that they're using for the whole world.
Yeah.
So you get used to that palette, and it makes it a more complete little corner of the world that these stories exist in. And you go to some modern comics, and there's just this heinous airbrushing.
Yeah.
And
it's so overdone. And I don't mean that they use that too much. I'm saying like in the comic itself, it's overdone. It's gross. I don't like it.
It's lifeless and ugly. It takes all of the beauty, the simplicity, the stroke of each line. It just kills the life in it.
Yeah, exactly. It completely hides all the line work, which I think can be so effective in comics.
And it makes everything this sparkly, brushy Disney World fake. There's no mood to anything. And it's all of this like shortcut to show contour, I guess. Like if you're showing a leg, you'd airbrush it so the middle would be lighter to show sort of the arch of the bend of the leg and the 3D shape of it. But I know it's a leg.
And
do
it's
something creative. And never do something realistic.
Right. And
make it interesting.
It's not like this one isn't engaging in shading and shadows, like because it does, but it does it in this beautifully simple way where it's like if you're using the leg as an example, the leg will just be 2 different colors.
There is
like 2 different shades of green or whatever. And like that's all you need.
Right.
Like it's being so efficient. It's
in the
really
same
good.
way I talked about the complementary nature of the images and the words here, there's a startling confidence. And it's cool because we read the introduction to this story.
The intro was so good. It was so sweet and like
humble.
Yeah.
Absolutely deferential to this character that he loved.
It felt very like honest and vulnerable. It was good.
Totally. And self-deprecating. I mean, calling it flawed and saying it was my first work on the character. I don't know how good it is,
and
but
I'm like,
I really
excuse
tried.
me, this is the best Batman comic
Exactly.
I've ever read.
And I think that's the only charming position for an artist to have.
Yeah.
Kanye. But there's also a technical confidence in the way this story is executed, where it's told through really strong line work, where it is hyper stylized and expressive, but all of that is the changing shape of the face and being able to represent feelings and emotions so that you're reading it, but you're hearing different voices. He's doing most of that work with the lines of the face.
Yeah.
And the highlights, the accent of that. Like you said, there are strong shadows in this story, but they're full blacks.
Yes.
It's the only time airbrushing is used here is for transitions. Like there's a light leak coming off of a light bulb or flames.
Oh, okay.
Or a transition from, when Batman says he's going to, when he blows up into lava and then fades back into nothing.
Yeah.
There's kind of an orange splash across Bruce's face as he recedes back into his normal form. But it's very it's very almost coincidental when the airbrushing is used. It's a transition back to these hard blocks which set a mood and a tone.
Yeah.
Like the more painterly color work we saw in year one.
Yeah.
Which is also flat, but incredibly, the line work is incredibly angular and expressive there. The strong use of black isn't just the shadow work here, though. It's Batman.
Yeah, he's like all black. And that's how he is like distinguished from when you see Bruce Wayne as Batman in the beginning. Like he's like wearing the costume and you can still see like some of the skin on his face.
Yep.
This Batman, like the one that's in his head, is like his face is all black and he just has like these like white eyes. He looks a lot like Venom, actually. Like it's similar,
he does.
with the big teeth. And yeah, it's lots of black. It's really cool.
And I noticed the background of these pages is black.
Cool.
So the pages are kind of growing out of that darkness in the same way the darkness of the character is being physicalized out of him so he can talk to it. You have the backgrounds, you have the panel borders, the hard black shadows in almost every page. Batman is pure black.
Yeah.
That face, he's part of the environment.
Yeah.
He is part of the shadow, which makes him ever present.
Yeah.
It makes him part of the character's background and psychology and always on his mind.
Yes.
It makes him even more ethereal and I think gives him permission to change form like that and grow like smoke or shadow would and change form so freely. It's all tied into this gorgeous visual language of the story. I'm so glad he did the writing and the art.
Me too.
Because he did a lot of work where he just wrote and he did some work where he just did the art.
You know what's funny? I'm realizing this. I said to you the other day, I was like, in a comic, I don't really notice when the writing is good. Like I notice when it's a good story and when like there's some good lines, but I'm much more focused on the art always because that's what I'm seeing. And because that's just for me what distinguishes it obviously from like a book, a normal book. But this one I noticed the writing being really good. Yeah. I think because it's mostly one character talking the whole time, Batman, or this version of Batman. And he's just like simultaneously narrating, like talking to us, but also talking to Bruce / himself because they're the same.
Sure.
And I noticed how like clever the storytelling was and how good the dialogue or monologue, I guess, was. Yeah. That's funny because I literally said I never noticed writing in a comic and I noticed it in this one. So that's cool.
One of the things that people dump on a lot now with modern comics, especially because so much of it is done digitally, is the idea of reused panels or backgrounds where things are, literally copy and paste.
Oh, nice.
And I was noticing, because like we talked about before, the layouts are so gorgeous throughout this story. And there are plenty of those 9-panel grids, which like you talked about Watchmen before. That's the famous formal structure of Watchmen, where it's all 9-panel grids. And here, when you have pages with a lot of panels on them, there are usually a couple that are repeated. But it's not a one-for-one repetition. They're recontextualized. If you look at the first page of this story, it's zooming out on a Gotham sign. Yeah. Where it starts with no.
Yes.
And you zoom out from there. And see different levels of words. And
and it ends up being like now leaving Gotham City. But like it's zoomed in on different parts, so you're reading different words.
So there's a hook at the beginning and the end. There's a shock and then a reveal. Every time something is repeated in the story, it's shifted, spun on its head, and shows you something new.
It has a purpose.
And that's part of why I talked about the quiet confidence that Darwyn Cooke has here. He holds your attention perfectly.
Yes, he does.
And when he's lingering on an image, it's because there's more to chew on, and he has something else to show you there. There could be no accusation of laziness here.
No,
it's
doesn't
so
feel lazy at all.
Masterful. And I read through it twice, and it felt like reading it the first time, both times.
That's nice.
It was incredibly rewarding. So I want to end with a slightly different kind of question to you.
Okay.
This story, the reason we talked about it and wanted to cover it on the show is that this, along with Batman Year One and Long Halloween, are being marketed and talked about constantly by the creative team as being the largest influences on the movie, the Matt Reeves one. Yeah. And I understand how Year One plays in. We already did an episode talking about that. And I'm not going to get you to read 13 issues of Long Halloween. But
it's an intriguing idea, though. I might just read it casually
it's a lot of fun
over a long period of time. But yeah.
But this one is always the first one listed as being the influence, because everything since Tim Burton has mentioned Batman Year One.
Oh, okay.
But this story is the number one listed influence on the new movie.
Oh, well, that makes. Well, go ahead.
What do you see?
Well,
from this story in that movie?
Yeah, what's stuck out most to me with this, apart from the gorgeous art style, was the internal struggle that Bruce is having about what it means to be Batman, who Batman's supposed to be, what function does he serve for himself in Gotham, in larger society. And that's obviously really explored in the movie, in the Robert Pattinson movie. We talked about on our episode, the idea of Batman not killing people is not unique to either of these. It seems like that's a pretty universal Batman thing, but he really explores it, and he has to battle with, should I kill the Riddler? Should I kill these other people who are causing all these problems? And he has to really combat that and figure. And also, this is, that movie is early in Batman's career. He's only been doing it for a couple years, right?
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he's trying to still figure out what exactly his role is and how he's supposed to handle these problems and how much of an effect does he really have. And you see Batman exploring that too. And also just, I talked a lot about, and I think what sticks out a lot with the movie is the characterization of this Bruce Wayne. He's this moody, brooding, reclusive, emo guy, right?
Introspective.
Because usually when in Batman you see, there's Batman, and then Bruce Wayne is this socialite, this rich guy, this womanizer, ladies man, going to all the parties, giving all the donations and the ribbon cuttings and being this handsome rich guy. But the Robert Pattinson Bruce Wayne is not like that at all.
Right.
He's still rich and famous, but
there's none of the playboy energy.
Not at all. He's completely withdrawn from society, is very brooding, doesn't really know what he wants out of life. All he has is Batman. And so this story in Batman Ego is exploring him, how do I grapple with that? How do I deal with that? How do I be Bruce Wayne and Batman at the same time? How interconnected do they have to be? So I totally see it. It's all the psychological stuff.
Yeah.
The more of the plot and the
Zodiac part.
Yeah, the plot and the vibe is definitely Batman Year One
and Long Halloween.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it.
That's the detective work.
Yeah,
part. Yeah.
But the psychological element, it really comes from here, I think.
Long Halloween is a parade of Batman villains, as every month someone who's connected to the mob is nuked. Mm-hmm. You can see how that ties into the movie.
Absolutely, yeah.
I made a little list of influences because I didn't want to just throw all the pressure on you.
Yeah.
I think the number one thing that is pulled from this story that shows up in the movie is the shift at the end from vengeance or revenge to becoming a symbol of hope.
Yes.
The last 10 pages of this story are the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Totally.
That's probably the most direct translation.
Yeah.
There's this one page early on in this story. It's one of those montage shots of early Batman. It's him reflecting on his crime-fighting career. And it's incredibly violent. He's just traumatizing criminals.
Yeah.
He's obliterating them.
Yeah.
In the same way you get shots at the beginning of The Batman of just the brutality that
absolutely
he treats,
destroying these guys. Yeah.
Bad people
he's
on the subway.
He's not killing anyone, but he's really damaging them.
He's ruining their lives.
He's causing some problems.
And there's that flirtation with that horrible early violence.
Yeah.
Which is certainly not present in Year One.
Yeah.
Year One is him trying to
barely
stop kids
managing
from
to
stealing a TV.
It's really clumsy because that's
them
him first becoming Batman, so it's really different. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But here you have that flash of early violence, basically the vengeance part coming through.
Yes.
There is also another translation here. You have the imperfect Batman emphasized constantly. His mistakes, his wounds.
Yeah.
He's bleeding through most of the story.
Yeah.
He's got bandages. He's not shot 3 times like he is during Year One.
Yeah.
But he's constantly bumping into things and misjudging and miscalculating.
And he's clearly got some sort of head injury because of everything going on.
Yeah. Right, which is that kind of Christmas Carol, are you a lump of boiled potatoes?
Yeah.
And there is a joke about that at some point in the story, which is a lovely little nod.
I did really
Dickens.
like that. I thought that was so funny. Mm-hmm.
I was trying to, and this is where the list got more difficult to make because I think those were the more obvious things to pull at.
Yeah.
The psychological journey in Batman Ego, undermining the mission of Batman, the crime-fighting mission, here all of that happens through Batman. But I've heard a lot of people say that in The Batman, the movie, Robert Pattinson is playing Batman the whole time. And there's not that Bruce Wayne part. There isn't the millionaire playboy part.
Because even when he is Bruce Wayne, he's just Batman, not in the costume.
He literally just took the hood off. He's got, I mean, everything else he's still in Batman mode.
Yeah, even when he's at the funeral, he saves the kid. And, you know.
He's doing homework or reconnaissance. But it's not really ever Bruce Wayne.
No.
In this story, all of that psychological journey undermining the Batman mission is done through Batman. But because in the Pattinson movie, he's always Batman, there's no conversation between those two halves. There really isn't the other half.
They haven't really been split. He's like hasn't figured out how to split them or how to segment them. That
journey that shakes and questions the whole foundation of his mission and character is the Riddler. That's what he does in the movie. With all of these revelations about Batman's parents and Gotham. He breaks all of those foundational
and
things.
He's forced to confront who Bruce Wayne is.
He confronts the Batman premise. And that's the whole... I mean, that's all the revelations of the movie, is trying to break him and show him that no one's fallible. Your parents weren't fallible. All the money they're investing in Gotham is corruption. None of it has any validity or hope to it. And here, all of that is done through Batman.
Yeah.
There's also the uneasy but very reliant relationship with Gordon. You have that here. He's a very minor character, but
he's barely there. But
you see the uneasiness of it. It's similar to the end of Year One in that you mentioned the emo self-reflection, dressed like Black Parade the whole time.
Yep.
And the allusions to Bruce Wayne's parents dying, but the story never really being directly about their murder.
Yes.
You get one collage shot here, but it's more about Bruce's reaction.
Yeah.
You don't see the pearls and the parents falling and the guy with the gun.
But you still get like the mom getting the pearl necklace for Christmas. So it's again, it's hinting,
smarter.
It's touching on. It's like, oh, I recognize that. Oh, it's all these icons, right? So
in the same way, it's talked around the event in the movie. And it's incredibly relevant to the plot in both cases.
Yes.
But they don't do the easy thing.
No.
Or the boring thing and just restage it. Yeah.
Right.
That's all I had for this. I just adored this story.
No, me too. I thought it was really good. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add that you haven't already said. But it's just, I just love how psychological it is and how it digs in and it confronts the idea of the superhero and of Batman, but also while still making it about a specific and believable character. It's really well done.
I feel like Year One is a good transition into now go off on your own and read a bunch of Batman.
Yeah, but if you want to just like start somewhere with, like you've never picked up a Batman comic
and you want a complete story,
this is a really good one.
It felt more satisfying than most comics I've read.
I'll also say if you like don't want to / don't have access to go to a comic store, I read this on Hoopla digitally. It was just at my library digitally for free, and I just read it on my laptop.
If you do go to a comic store, they're doing some actually cool marketing right now where they're doing a Batman box set of this Year One and Long Halloween.
Oh, as like a promo for the movie?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Very cool.